President Donald Trump's promise to crack down on what he calls illegal campus protests is in high gear and focused in on Columbia University. This after ICE agents arrested a prominent Palestinian activist, Mahmoud Khalil, over the weekend.
We have created the only safe space for Palestinians on this campus with no help from the university.
Khalil helped lead the student protests at the Ivy League campus last year. ICE reportedly acting on orders to take his green card despite Khalil's status as a permanent resident. News Nation correspondent Caitlin Becker joins us from Columbia's campus in New York City.
Well, Judy, activist Mahmoud Khalil was taken into custody at his campus-owned apartment over the weekend where he lives with his wife. Now, he is legally here in the country with a green card. However, this arrest attempts to revoke that. At the moment, we don't know where he is. His lawyer was told he's at a facility in Elizabeth, New Jersey, but when his wife went to visit him, reportedly he wasn't there. The ICE website says he's at a facility in Louisiana, and an activist group claims that he's in Lower Manhattan, but we just don't have those answers quite yet. Khalil was one of the leaders of the protests against the war on Gaza here at Columbia University last spring, even serving as one of the negotiators between the university and the Gaza Solidarity Encampment. DHS, however, seeing this quite differently. In a post on X, the Department of Homeland Security seemingly referencing those demonstrations, saying Khalil, quote, led activities aligned to Hamas, a designated terrorist organization. Now, President Trump has been vocal in condemning what he calls, quote, agitators, saying they will be sent back to the country from which they came, prompting civil liberties groups to condemn this arrest as a violation of First Amendment rights. As for the university, Columbia releasing a statement saying they are, quote, committed to complying with all legal obligations and supporting our student body and campus community. We are also committed to the legal rights of our students and urge all members of the community to be respectful of those rights. Local Jewish leaders, rabbis, and faculty at Columbia and its affiliate Barnard College have condemned this arrest as an egregious violation of Khalil's rights. Others are also condemning Columbia, urging them to resist this ongoing immigration push on campus. Judy, back to you.
News Nation's Caitlin Becker, thank you. Over the weekend, House Speaker Mike Johnson revealed plans for a government funding stopgap through September 30th. Congress now has until Friday at midnight to pass the bill and avoid a government shutdown, a major test for Republican leadership as they look to unify the party behind the continuing resolution. But with a razor-thin majority in the House, Johnson can't afford to lose more than one vote, something that remains unclear he can accomplish. Joining me now is the Hill's congressional reporter, Mychael Schnell. Mychael, thank you for joining us. Johnson released that 99-page continuing resolution on Saturday. What's the Speaker's math looking like right now?
So in any given day, based on the current margins, if all Democrats vote against something and there's full attendance, Johnson can only afford to lose one member and still get this over the finish line. So where we are right now, Thomas Massie, a Republican from Kentucky, he frequently bucks the party on fiscal matters. He, by no one's surprise, had announced this morning that he is going to vote against this continuing resolution, which means Mike Johnson has no more room to spare. Literally, he needs to have everybody else on board. Now, of course, that math could change if there are some absences. There are some Democrats who are going through some health ailments, particularly Raul Grijalva. He's been suffering from cancer. Brittany Peterson also gave birth about a little over a month ago, so she's been out of Washington. So absences can change that. And then if Democrats, any of them support the bill, that could change the math as well. But if this remains a party line vote with full attendance, Mike Johnson cannot lose any other Republicans.
No breathing room. House GOP leadership has said that the bill has Trump's stamp of approval. What do we know about funding levels in the CR?
Yeah, so it's going to be below FY 2024 levels. It pluses up defense funding, increases funding for defense. This was something that was of concern to a number of defense hawks who had warned that they would not support the continuing resolution unless the Pentagon was taken care of. But then it decreases funding about a little over $10 billion for non-defense programs. So what that is, folks are still digging into the details, trying to figure that out, but it essentially pluses up defense and brings down non-defense. Now that's where you're going to draw some criticism from Democrats and some opposition from Democrats, because likely some of the provisions that they are in favor of are going to take a hit with those non-defense cuts. So that's essentially what we're looking at right now. And of course, the CR would take you through the end of the fiscal year until September 30th.
Democrats have continued to say that Republicans are going at this thing alone. But if there are some GOP holdouts like Massey, as you mentioned, could Democratic lawmakers actually help the GOP pass this thing?
They sure can, but I don't think in the House, at least, that's going to be likely. We heard from Hakeem Jeffries, Catherine Clark, and Pete Aguilar, the top three House Democrats, over the weekend, who put out a joint statement really slamming this piece of legislation and announcing that they will not support it. So leadership not going to vote for it. That means you're going to get the vast majority of the caucus in line not to support it. Now, the question is, will some moderate folks, people who are from some of these swing districts, will they buck the party and vote in favor of this bill? That remains an open question. So my colleague Mike Lillis had spoken to a few of those folks last week before this CR was unveiled. Tom Suozzi, for example, from a swing district in New York. He said he wasn't planning on supporting this partisan continuing resolution. Will that change? Will there be one or two who can help Johnson out? Quite possibly. Now, that's in the House. In the Senate, it's a whole different story. If this bill does squeak through the chamber, it would need likely at least 7 or 8 Democratic votes in the Senate to get past that 60-vote filibuster. That's a very large number. Right now, we've only heard from John Fetterman, a Democrat from Pennsylvania, who has suggested that he may get behind it. But we heard from someone like Alyssa Slotkin over the weekend, who said, I'm not going to support a funding bill unless I get assurances that the money that is appropriated is going to be directed by President Trump. Alyssa Slotkin, of course, hailing from the swing state of Michigan. So it's going to be interesting to see how some of these frontliners and swing state Democrats handle this vote.
The Trump administration, of course, is continuing its plans to scale back government spending. Over the weekend, the Department of Health and Human Services offered $25,000 buyouts to its 80,000 employees. What do you think, what services is that going to impact the most?
Yeah, so the expectation is that these buyouts are going to affect a large swath in areas within the Department of Health and Human Services. I just want to make sure I get the names right here and the right ones. Center of Disease Control and Prevention is included, NIH, the National Institute of Health is included, and Food and Drug Administration. That's a very large swath of this agency. So I think that this just goes hand in hand to show that, you know, Trump, as you mentioned, on the campaign trail made it very clear he wanted to decrease the size and scope of the federal government, made that a priority in his first few weeks in office, opened up this Department of Government Efficiency, put Elon Musk in charge to oversee it. So we're seeing sort of him carry through, and we're seeing the rubber meet the road on some of these vows. Now, we know, of course, that there have been some mistakes that have been made in this process. Mistake is a word that Elon Musk himself has used, and some other missteps that have created a lot of criticism and pushback from Democrats and Republicans. So we're going to have to see how this HHS effort carries through.
Do you think with the HHS effort, it's going to help Democrats' argument that these cuts will affect Medicare and Medicaid, and that could be a target of the Trump administration?
It could certainly be an argument that they make. You know, I think we'll first have to see who takes the buyouts, and then are there going to be layoffs after that, and what areas specifically are they impacting. But we know that throughout the first few weeks of the Trump administration, a big Democratic message has been saying that Republicans want to cut Medicaid, and that's because of, to make a long story short, the GOP's Trump agenda bill. The House version of that says that you need at least $880 billion in cuts from the Energy and Commerce Committee. Energy and Commerce Committee has jurisdiction over Medicaid. A lot of folks are saying you can't reach that number unless you cut into Medicaid. That's what's prompting those concerns among Democrats. Is it a salient issue? We're going to have to see over the coming weeks. But Democrats are certainly running with it. So it's going to be interesting to see if they use these HHS layoffs and buyouts as part of that argument.
The Trump administration has announced cuts to the Department of Veterans Affairs, roughly 80,000 employees. Democrats are livid over this plan. Let's hear what Senator Tim Kaine had to say about it.
We're trying to do everything we can to put protections in for employees, and then we are also leaning on the president, you know, at least for some groups of employees. Why do these layoffs at the VA? Or why lay off veterans? I mean, 30% of the federal workforce is veterans, including a lot of people who have been laid off at the CFPB. Can you do at least show some compassion to veterans? So it's, you know, courts, Congress, pressuring the administration. We got to do it all.
So, Michael, do you think that Democrats are going to be able to work with President Trump about some of these potential layoffs in the Veterans Affairs Administration?
It's possible. I think it's going to be a question of, do Republicans share these same concerns about the VA, and are the Republicans the ones to voice the concerns to the Trump administration to then get some movement, potentially some backtracks on it? I think this could be one area that maybe we could see some bipartisan cooperation on. However, I will caveat that by saying Democrats I speak to are just very frustrated and very angry with the beginning weeks of the Trump administration, particularly these efforts by DOJ to decrease, again, the size and scope of the federal government. So they're not going to be so, apt to work with them, the Trump administration, on anything. Really, I think they're going to be going in with a lot of that skepticism. Could VA and Veterans Affairs be something that does find that common ground? Absolutely. But it's important to remember that Democrats are coming to these potential talks and these conversations in a very skeptical way because of what has happened in the first 6-8 weeks of the administration. So it's going to be interesting to continue to watch that relationship develop.
Looking ahead to the midterms, are Republicans worried at all that some of these mass layoffs could affect things for them going into the midterms?
I mean, it's entirely a possibility. This reminds me, and I'll bring up when we were talking about a few weeks ago, these town halls that were happening in districts across the country where constituents were going and complaining to the Republican members of Congress about the layoffs, about some things that DOJ has done, about potential cuts to Medicaid, about just this scope and power that Elon Musk has been given. There have been some concerns voiced, and that's why at the end of the day last week we saw Republican leaders urge their members to hold more teletown halls and not in-person town halls to try to prevent these sort of confrontational moments that have gone viral on social media. So just right now, for reading the tea leaves, based on those constituents coming to those town halls, there clearly is some frustration. Now, 2026, in one way it's close, in another way it's very far away. What will be the main thing that people are talking about right before they head to the ballot box? It's anyone's question, anything can happen over the next few months, but absolutely I would think that DOJ is going to be the top of the list of something that Democrats are messaging on in anticipation of those midterms.
Always thinking about the next election.
That's right.
Mychael Schnell, thank you so much
Thanks,
for joining
Judy.
us. Washington, D.C. has begun to work on removing the Black Lives Matter Plaza today. The move comes after D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser announced plans to remove the large yellow lettering following pressure from the White House. Construction workers were seen today dismantling the street next to the White House with jackhammers. The removal comes after Republican Representative Andrew Clyde introduced legislation that would have taken away hundreds of millions of dollars in federal funding for D.C. if it was not painted over. The plaza was first painted with the words Black Lives Matter in the summer of 2020 after the death of George Floyd at the hands of Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin. The work is expected to take 6 to 8 weeks. The Trump administration's effort to shrink the federal government continue to cause confusion. Last week, major federal buildings were posted online as potential properties to sell. Then shortly after, the properties were taken down. Next, our nation's Haley Mylon with DC News Now has the latest.
Yeah, that's right, and that's why this was so surprising to see Washington, D.C. icons being put on a list to potentially be put up for sale. On that list, for example, the J. Edgar Hoover building, that is the FBI headquarters here in D.C. Also on the list, this building right here, the Robert F. Kennedy Department of Justice building. Now on Tuesday, the General Services Administration listed 440 federal properties. The next day, that list shrunk to 320 properties, and it didn't include these DC icons. Now the list is gone entirely now, and the page says coming soon. Properties in Maryland and Northern Virginia also made the list, including the proposed FBI headquarters site in Springfield, Virginia. Properties also house administrative workers for services like Medicaid and Medicare. The GSA hasn't responded to media requests about the list and whether these properties could actually be sold. The Associated Press reports that an email to GSA staffers said the list generated overwhelming interest, and the agency will consider compelling offers on any of the buildings. This comes as Elon Musk and his DOJ associates slash jobs and spending from the federal government. But DC Mayor Muriel Bowser sharply is criticizing the move.
That list I saw was outrageous. And I just don't know how you can function as a centralized federal bureaucracy without the Department of Justice. You cannot dump buildings on the market without preparation or a plan.
And this also comes as Musk and his associates direct the federal government to end leases at nearly 1,000 federal government sites across the country. In Northwest DC, I'm Haley Mylon, DC News Now.
Haley Mylon, thanks for your reporting. That's today's Daily Debrief. I'm Judy Kurtz. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the Hill's YouTube channel, and come back here soon for the intersection between politics and policy.